Acts chapter 7. We're picking up Stephen's thumbnail review of Hebrew history. Last time we looked at the part where he talked about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob, of course, was the father of the 12 patriarchs, from which the 12 tribes of Israel came. But, verse 9, because the patriarchs were jealous of Joseph, they sold him as a slave into Egypt. I don't think we can relate to what that would be like. I'll just leave it at that. Well, no, I won't. Our view of slavery is, this was, thousands of years before Jesus, and many thousands of years before any kind of slavery got imported into America, and our second and third hand understanding of slavery comes basically from that. But what is in common is that those slaves brought to America, and by the way, I've been reading some interesting things about the fact that white men didn't sail into Africa and begin kidnapping and capturing Africans to drag away in the slave boats across back to England and eventually to America. They most often, in fact, from what I read, purchased them from African kings who had rounded them up. Well, anyway, you can do with whatever you want to. I'm not saying slavery didn't happen. I'm just saying slavery that we have any sense of from a degrading sense of history over time was probably not the same as the slavery that Joseph experienced, but it was similar in this fact that Joseph was taken from his home and family and delivered into a culture not his own, with a language not his own, and without being able to pursue his own expectations and desires. Anyway, there's two words that come up next in the text that, I don't know, probably millions of sermons have been written around. But God was with him. But God. How often in our lives have things looked really bad, and our experience was really bad, but God. Now, I'm thinking about my own life. These moments, but God moments, I don't see them as they're happening. I wish I was mature enough and deep enough that I had enough faith to see them as they happen. But for me, it's nearly always in review, in retrospect. And that's valid and valuable. But God, on January 10th, 2011, I died. 3 or 4 times. I thankfully wasn't present for any of it, but God, it was a series of miracles, and I'm not going to burn my time with them. Just to say, that was one, really big deal for me, where God showed up. Wait, that's not even fair, because God didn't just show up. Because he was there all the time. He intervened, yes. But it's not about God showing up. Uh-uh. Okay. But God was with him and rescued him from all his troubles. The rescue was quite interesting. Uh, had I been Joseph, this is not the way I would have wanted it scripted, right? Falsely accused of rape by what I read into the story in Genesis by a vain and frustrated woman who also was quite spoiled. And she was of the elite. For in her culture, she was very, very wealthy. Well, her husband was, and respected and powerful. Well, anyway, as a result of that, Joseph winds up in prison. God wired Joseph in a way that he was able to understand systems and see how to make them work. That's my interpretation of it, and that's what happened. He wound up literally running the prison until finally, more than a year after he had interpreted a dream for the cupbearer of the king, he'd also, which the interpretation of the dream was that the king was going to restore him to his status and role. He had been in prison with Joseph, and we don't know why, but and then he interpreted a similar kind of dream from the Pharaoh's baker, but that one was not so great. The baker was going to be executed in it, and that's what happened. Well, the cupbearer said, "I will never forget this." And Joseph said, "Tell Pharaoh I'm wrongly here. I don't deserve to be here." And the cupbearer said, "Oh, I absolutely will." But he forgot. And more than a year later, Pharaoh had a dream, and the cupbearer's light came on. Oh, yeah, there's this Joseph guy. I forgot to tell you about him. Well, anyway, through a series of events that it seems to me, it seems pretty clear, God orchestrated, God rescued him. He gave Joseph wisdom and enabled him to gain the goodwill of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. So Pharaoh made him ruler over Egypt and all his palace. Now, this is big because in that day, the greatest power in the world was Egypt. This is it's not, I don't know that we can relate to what that meant. And the status that Joseph achieved was weak. It's not even, our country's not set up anything like this. See, because Egypt was not a democracy. It wasn't a republic. It was a monarchy. And the Pharaoh was the king, and what he said, that's what was, it was the world was his oyster. You remember the dream, right? Two dreams that Pharaoh had. One was that sleek, fat cows were consumed by scrawny, skinny cows, and full, fat ears of corn were consumed by withered, wimpy ears. What in the world? Well, Joseph interpreted the dream. He said, you're going to have 7 years of amazing prosperity. followed by 7 years of severe famine. My opinion is you better get ready for this. Well, the Pharaoh was so taken by Joseph's interpretation that he, pretty much instantly elevated Joseph out of prison into the court, as a matter of fact, second in command. That's a fun. I used to love to tell this story in junior church. I love telling it to kids, and I love telling it to adults. It's a great story. Well, the bottom line, well, not the bottom line. Stephen goes on. Luke records in verse 11, a famine struck all Egypt and Canaan, bringing great suffering, and our ancestors could not find food. When Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our forefathers on their first visit. Well, that leaves a whole lot out of the story. Now, the Joseph's brothers had no idea that Joseph was even in Egypt, let alone that he had been elevated to this position of power and authority. They were just going to try to get grain because they were out. But you can read this story for yourself. There's tons to it. The second visit, which was, you need to go back and read it for yourself. On their second visit, Joseph told his brothers who he was, and Pharaoh learned about Joseph's family. And when Pharaoh learned about it, he said, pick a spot. Go get your family here. Pick whatever part of the country you want. It's yours. Well, after this, Joseph, in verse 14, sent for his father Jacob and the whole family, 75 in all. Then Jacob went down to Egypt, where he and our ancestors died. Wow. That is, you talk about concise history. that puts the size in concise. Verse 16. Their bodies were brought back to Shechem and placed in the tomb that Abraham had bought from the sons of Hamor at Shechem for a certain sum of money. 17. As the time drew near for God to fulfill his promise to Abraham, the number of our people in Egypt had greatly increased. There are Bible scholars who indicate their conservative estimate would have been 3 million. Well, that's not like America has, the last I heard, 30 million plus, or 300 million plus, sorry. But 3 million people is no small thing. That's not a small population. It's like they're all in one place. But they continued to prosper and grow in Egypt until, in verse 18, a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt. Okay, just a little, just to pause on that. That's how it works. Something amazing, important, dramatic happens. And over time, it's not dramatic anymore. Oh, this was a 300-year span of time that Stephen shrinks down to just what we have as one verse. That's natural. All right. I don't even have time left to make any sort of application, so I'm just going to quit and come back to it next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.